Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Wait tonight, bets are off. I'm gonna find my way tonight. Wait tonight, won't you talk to me? I wanna heal your sorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make a new tomorrow. Won't you talk to me? What makes this happy faster? Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Wait tonight, bets are off. I'm gonna find my way tonight. Wait tonight, won't you talk to me? I wanna heal your sorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make a new tomorrow. Won't you talk to me? What makes this happy faster?
Okay, good evening. Welcome back. Oh, where are my captions? I was doing so well. I had them going for several sessions, and then I dropped the ball. I screwed the pooch. I failed. I am a failure. Oh well. Quick fix. Alrighty, so we're up to section, what is it, section 3, section 4 of Forbidden Religion, the power and reach of the high-ranking Freemasons. So, the first article tonight, we're going to read 2 again, as usual. Seems to work out pretty well that way. We are going to read The Star-Spangled Banner and America's Origins. Were the founders of the United States guided by an ancient mandate by Jeff Nisbet. So we will jump into that. And, yeah. Let's go. My article, The Mystery of the Battle of Bannockburn, which is included in this book, proposed that the great 1314 battle for Scottish independence had been stage managed by a clandestine brotherhood that stood on both sides of the battle line and had been forever fixed in time as an event and had been forever fixed in time as an event of great symbolic significance by uncannily mirroring a simultaneous encounter in the heavens above. Okay. Bannockburn, I proposed, was an epic contract between enemies of convenience, written in the invisible ink of the stars at daytime and sealed with the blood of battle. It follows that many of the rank and file who fought that day thought they were fighting for freedom only, but in fact were also fighting so that certain forbidden truths could be sent quietly forward to a more enlightened time. The Brotherhood knew that books could be burned and messages carved in stone could be crushed into dust, but the arrangement of the heavens would forever be safe from tampering, and so it was there, supported by some pointed hints in the official record, that they hid their secrets. 500 years after the Battle of Bannockburn, that brotherhood would meet again to fix yet another date in time and to reaffirm their ancient contract. Once again they would pretend to be enemies, and once again they would hide their secrets in the sky. Let's go back. Very early in the morning of September 14th, 1814, a young American lawyer named Francis Scott Key stood on the deck of a British truce ship waiting for the dawn. In a letter to a friend, Key would later describe the dawn's arrival as a bright streak of gold mingled with crimson shot athwart the eastern sky, followed by another and still another, as the morning sun rose in the fullness of his glory, lifting the mists of the deep, crowning a heaven-blessed land with a new victory and grandeur. End quote. And then we have an illustration right off the bat. Francis Scott Key observes the aftermath of the British attack on Fort McHenry, Maryland, on the morning of September 14th, 1812. I said 1814 back here. It says 1812 here. I'm guessing that first one's a typo. So anyway, let's see this picture. There is a great video out there that describes the story of this, and it's probably at least partially fictional, but it's a pretty good story if you've ever. It's I think it's called "The Star Spangled Banner" as you've never heard it. A lot of people do reactions to it. If you haven't seen it, look it up on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it's still there. He had just witnessed the end of the 25-hour naval bombardment of Maryland's Fort McHenry, the fort that guarded the entrance to Baltimore Harbor. The sight of an immense American flag flying o'er the ramparts of the fort would inspire him to scribble down the lyrics to "The Star-Spangled Banner." That anthem would be Key's single claim to fame and would commemorate the most memorable event in America's otherwise most forgotten war. Often referred to as America's Second War of Independence, there were several reasons for the War of 1812, but the immediate reason was the British Navy's nasty habit of boarding American ships and pressing certain of the crew into its own ranks on the grounds that they were British deserters. The action rankled, and Americans went to war for the first time as a sovereign nation. Much has been speculated about the early foundations of America. It has been proposed that the country was begun as a grand experiment of the Brotherhood of Freemasons, a fraternity thought by many to have grown out of the Knights Templar, the mysterious order of warrior monks barbarously suppressed in France on grounds of heresy, among other charges, in 1307. And we have another uh, illustration. This one is, or a picture. I don't know if this is it almost looks like a photo. An American flag similar to this Star-Spangled Banner was hoisted over Fort McHenry, Maryland, after its assault by the British, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write his famous anthem. So I'll show this. It's a huge flag. That's a guy standing down right there. Okay. It has also been proposed, however, that many Templars escaped to Scotland and delivered the decisive blow against the English at Bannockburn. Going underground, the order then cobbled together yet another brotherhood within the civil sector that would survive the Protestant Reformation, the great church schism that gave the Vatican a new force to reckon with. Although the Templar connection is still hotly debated, that new brotherhood is thought to be the Freemasons. Almost 300 years after Bannockburn, in 1603, the crowns of England and Scotland would finally unite under the first officially Masonic king, Scotland's James VI. Shortly thereafter, the great migration to the New World would begin in earnest. In Michael Bajant and Richard Lay's Temple in the Lodge, the authors claim, which I've already read on this stream, the authors claim that many of America's founding fathers were Freemasons, and that the precipitating acts of the American Revolution were planned by that brotherhood. Many Freemasons, they claim, were key participants in the famous Boston Tea Party. One of them was Paul Revere, famous for his midnight ride to Lexington, where the shot heard round the world was fired. It is interesting to note that from George Washington on down, a disproportionate number of Freemasons were among the American high command, including a General Arthur Sinclair, a descendant of Sir William Sinclair, who built Scotland's Rosslyn Chapel, the world's most revered repository of Freemasonic lore. William, in turn, was a descendant of a man thought to have led the Templar charge at Bannockburn, who was himself descended from Henry Sinclair, who arguably may have organized a voyage of discovery to the New World in 1398, long before Columbus was a twinkle in his father's eye. Bajant and Lay also imply, however, that the top British commanders were Freemasons as well, and showed little zeal to win the war. It was perhaps thought more prudent to let the new land govern itself, while each country's movers and shakers remained bound by brotherly bonds. A mutually beneficial dialogue would then be quietly maintained, while highly motivated hordes of European immigrants proceeded to kick America's indigenous people about from place to place in the Great March West. But they needed a flag to march behind. It is well known that the first American flag was commissioned by George Washington and was sewn by Betsy Ross. But it is less well known that Betsy's husband was a Freemason, and that Washington described the flag's circle of stars as a new constellation. While we are taught that the circle symbolizes the 13 original states, could Washington have something else in mind? Might he have been secretly invoking the Hermetic dictum, as above, so below, a phrase much bandied about whenever Templars, Freemasons, and underground streams of knowledge are discussed in the same breath? Could that stellar circle also symbolize the letter O for Orion, the constellation that played such a pivotal role at Bannockburn? American Declaration of Independence, signed by Washington and many other Freemasons, is thought to have been inspired by Scotland's Declaration of Arbroath, which was signed shortly after Bannockburn by many individuals associated with the survival of Templar and Freemasonic ideals. That stirring document can still be interpreted as a testament to the equality of men, and as strong advice to any Templar ruler unwise enough to hold the will of the people in contempt. During the years following the American Revolution, however, the young nation somehow failed to develop a unity of spirit that the world's major powers would respect. The War of 1812 would change all that, and the bombardment of Fort McHenry would force the world to see the stars and stripes with new eyes, and would give the American people a song to sing. The British assault on Baltimore was like the English assault at Bannockburn, a two-pronged affair. British General Robert Ross, who had shown remarkable restraint by burning only government buildings during his earlier sack of the nation's capital, led his men toward Baltimore by land. The assault failed when Ross became one of the first casualties, and with an effect eerily reminiscent of a similar event at Bannockburn. His men lost morale. Okay, we have, before I go on, there's another picture. This one looks like a painting. British naval forces assail Fort McHenry, Baltimore. Okay. So there's right in the mid ground is the fort, the foreground is the city, and the background is the British ships, if you can't tell what you're seeing there. All right. Meanwhile, the British fleet had anchored broadside to Fort McHenry. At 7 a.m. on September 13th, and continuing for 25 hours with just one break of several hours, British warships bombarded the fort. Key's lyrics, however, tell us that the bombs were bursting in air before reaching their targets. The fuses had been inexplicably set too short to go the distance, but the light of the bombs and the rockets' red glare did manage to give proof that through the night that our flag was still there. It was quite a show and a relatively cheap one. Only 4 Americans are known to have died during the attack. But there was a much bigger show going on above, one that would outlive the tale we are told today. I think that kind of contradicts the video I was talking about, the Star Spangled Banners. You have never heard it. Um, I thought they described quite a few more people dying than just 4, but I don't know. I may be misremembering. It was quite a show and a relatively cheap one. Much bigger show going on above, one that would outlive the tale we are told today. At 3:41 a.m., the morning star Venus rose above the eastern horizon, midway between the 4 legs of Leo, just minutes before the rising of Regulus, a significant star in Masonic tradition. If the night had been dark, clear, and eventless, they would have made a pretty pair, but it was raining, the air was full of smoke, and all eyes were trained on the light show below. Mercury rose at 5:16 a.m. as Leo appeared on the horizon in a stance well reminiscent of the flag carried at Bannockburn, the flag Scots still fly today, followed quickly by the war planet Mars. Even if the bombardment had not been the main focus of attention, these events would already have faded in the light of the approaching dawn. Just 20 minutes later, giant Jupiter would rise behind the sun, followed shortly by the moon. Toward the east, if we include the sun and moon, 6 denizens of our solar system lay within just 36 degrees of sky, all but one of those lying within 7 degrees, a surprisingly rare alignment. The planet Pluto surprised me even more. Pluto is the outermost planet in our solar system, so far out that it takes approximately 249 Earth years to orbit the Sun. Not discovered until 1930, many years after the siege of Fort McHenry, Pluto takes a very long time to get from one side of the solar system to the other, and yet there it was, due west of the battle, but part of the same alignment. But the biggest surprise was the planet Neptune, not discovered until 1846, with an orbit time of 165 years, when a line was drawn between Neptune and Pluto, and another line drawn between Neptune and the midpoint of Pluto's Earth easternmost orbit, a compass was formed. When another line connected the two endpoints, a pyramid was formed, and when a line was drawn between Neptune and the Sun, everything weirdly doubled. Astrologers call this particular configuration a T-square, and I am told it usually portends events of a sinister nature, but more about astrology later. And we have another picture. This is the one with all the connecting dots. The position of the stars and planets shortly after dawn on September 14th, 1812. I'll have to get really close for you to see it. There we go. A whole lot going on there. I don't really see all the shapes he's talking about, to be honest. But okay, I'd have to look at it a bit more than just glancing at it as we read through. Okay, as reported, the assault had ceased at dusk on September 13th and had resumed at 1 a.m. when the first belt star of Orion broke the horizon, some 3,000 miles to the east. Dawn was breaking in the sky above Bannockburn, and Leo stood defiantly on the Scottish horizon as the bombs again began bursting in air above Fort McHenry. It was a long and noisy night, but the Brits eventually set sail at dawn, leaving the grand finale to the Americans. Meanwhile, in the skies east of Bannockburn, Hercules slew Serpens aquaticus, the many-headed water serpent. How's that for synchronicity? The Battle of Baltimore was fought on many fronts indeed. It is a common misconception, not correct in most history books, that the immense 30 by 42-foot Fort McHenry flag currently undergoing restoration in Washington, D.C.'s Smithsonian Institution was the flag that was flown throughout the bombardment. It was not. Fort McHenry Commander Major George Armistead had ordered two flags to be made and had required that one of them be large enough so that the British would have no trouble seeing it from a distance. It was the smaller flag that was flown during the bombardment. It was the larger flag hoisted at dawn that inspired Key's song. What else about the flag and the continuing mystery of the bombardment itself might warrant a closer look? Here's the short list. Stitched prominently in red on the third white bar from the bottom is what has variously been described as a patch, the letter A for Armistead, or an inverted V. We might also our we might ask ourselves the following: why would someone patch a white bar with a red patch? Leave off the crossbar of a letter A, or turn a V upside down. Might I suggest that this element symbolizes the ever enigmatic Masonic compass? It is also highly provocative that the letter B is almost invisibly embroidered near the top of the compass, perhaps to commemorate Bannockburn. That's one bullet point. These are all bullet points, they're not numbered. The second one: architecturally, Fort McHenry was star-shaped and had been named after Freemason James McHenry, U.S. Secretary of War during Washington's presidency. The third one: there is a legend that as the British fleet retreated, a rooster crowed defiance from the top of the flagpole. That herald of dawn is prominently displayed on the seal of the Sinclair clan with the motto, "Commit thy work to God." 4. The Francis Scott Key Bridge spans the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. to Roslyn, Virginia, perhaps another quiet symbol of the secret transatlantic arrangement made so many years ago. And 5. The very name Scott Key resonates with the suggestion that one key to unlocking this great mystery will be found in Scotland. Okay, maybe if that really wasn't his name and they put him in as Scott Key to, I don't know. Hey, Nambro, how's it going? It's been a few minutes since you came in. I'm sorry I was busy reading and didn't even see. But welcome. While I have described the astronomical arrangement of the skies above Fort McHenry and Bannockburn, and have tipped my hat to the ancient mythological connections, I have paid only brief lip service to astrological considerations because astrology is not a field I have studied enough to feel comfortable with. Astronomy and astrology were once virtually inseparable disciplines, but not today. Though astronomy has acquired a gloss of scientific respectability, astrology has not fared so well. I have nevertheless asked Rab Wilkie and Ed Cahoot, both knowledgeable in the understudied field of Masonic astrology, to weigh in with their thoughts on my theories in 100 words or less. Stingy, I know. They have so far weighed in with thousands and deserve a forum larger than this article can provide. To properly present their views and do them justice, I thank them both for helping me adjust the accompanying heliocentric graphic into something the average reader can visually comprehend. They have also enthusiastically convinced me that what each of us has seen so far is just the tip of the rather large iceberg. These are interesting times indeed. And here is the illustration they helped him with. Compressed heliocentric view of the solar system at dawn, September 14th, and again they have 1814, but it's 1812. I was talking about the War of 1812, but twice in this article they had where they said 1814, which is incorrect. So here we go. So there's the pyramid he was talking about, and the compass, I suppose, is the well, it is a square. He said compass earlier, but it's the square for sure. And then I don't know where he sees compass in that because that's more of a 90-degree angle. But anyway, um, I'm not the expert on Masons and the Masonic symbols. So, some final thoughts about the subject at hand. Consider that the most famous song inspired by the Battle of Bannockburn was Scots Wha Hae, written by Scots bard and Freemason Robert Burns. Consider that Freemason Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner during the War of 1812. Consider that Freemason John Philip Sousa's last performance was to conduct his Stars and Stripes Forever in 1932. And finally, consider the possibility that a small yet influential clandestine brotherhood was marching in secret to its own drum since 1314, if not earlier. Considering all those things, one might well wonder what the Freemason George M. Cohen had in mind when he penned the last few lines of You're a Grand Old Flag, using a phrase from the Robert Burns mega-hit Auld Lang Syne. Could Cohen have written those lines for brothers with ears to hear? And here are the lines. Every heart beats true 'neath the red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on that grand old flag. Okay, and like religion, flags have always had the uncanny ability to keep large groups of people united, ready to fight for a common cause at the drop of a hat. Unfortunately, flags and religion have also been found useful in keeping even larger groups of people apart, and for the most part, that's why the great chess game called war has never lacked for pawns. But who plays the game and who are the pieces? And that's the end of that article. And that takes us straight into a 6-page article, America's Ancient Architect. Were America's Founders Pursuing a Hidden Agenda by Stephen Sora. The last one was by Jeff Nisbet, and it was a little bit longer, mostly because of the pictures. Okay, so let's just jump on into it, unless anybody has anything they want to add. Comments? Hopes, dreams, desires? No? Okay. The history of the United States was forged by the power of secret, often elite societies. George Washington, John Hancock, and Benjamin Franklin were all members of Masonic lodges. Connections made through Freemasonry allowed them to provide the spark that incited America on the road to liberty and supplied her with goods, ammunition, and allies to fight the battle, and, through years of defeat, arise to strike the decisive victory. Hancock was a smuggler. As a ship owner and an heir to his uncle's merchant empire, he resorted to smuggling because Britain had made illegal almost any import that did not come from England. A full one-third of Boston's families depended on Hancock for their livelihood. The city depended on him for foodstuffs and commodities. He, in turn, needed to depend upon people whom he could trust. While he belonged to an elite lodge where fellow merchants and sea captains made up the privileged few, he also belonged to the rank and file lodge of St. Andrews, where he could meet and be acquainted with the men he would hire. What greater place could he find to recruit those whom he needed to sail, build, outfit, and load and unload his ships? Sworn to secret oaths, acknowledged by secret handshakes, and pledged to assist fellow Masons, being a lodge brother meant that one could be counted on to be a trusted employee. When considering a potential employee, the key consideration was often whether or not the man was on the level or on the square. This ensured trust. In 1767, a ship owned by Hancock, propitiously dubbed the Liberty, was boarded by customs agents. It carried Madeira wine, a commodity that was not allowed to be imported on colonial ships. While some of Hancock's men locked the customs agents in a room, others unloaded the ship. The king's men were not amused and seized the ship anyway. This began a series of measures and reactions that culminated in the Boston Tea Party. That night 30 men dressed as Mohawks threw 10,000 pounds of the king's tea into Boston's murky harbor. 12 men were from the St. Andrew's Lodge, which met at the Green Dragon Tavern. The rest were from two revolutionary cells, the Sons of Liberty and the Loyal Nine. Loyal Nine. Unless that's a typo. It's got two L's at the end. Their actions closed the port and enlisted the other states to the cause. And I don't know that anybody needs to see this, but there is an illustration, the Masonic symbol of the compass and the square. So in case you're not familiar, which how can you live in America and not have seen that? It's everywhere. Um, anyway, Washington was a farmer, a surveyor, and a military man. To further his business, his brother clued him in to the importance of joining a lodge. It meant connections, assistance, and, as in the case of Hancock, being able to trust those you brought into your business or up in rank. The future president took the same lesson to war. Washington operated through the Field Lodge, a new development in Freemasonry that began in the French and Indian War, when Washington's career began as well. As the army moved, a stationary lodge was of no help. The Field Lodge was a tent where the Masons met. It was a refuge where privates could speak freely with officers and where Washington could assemble with his generals, as many of whom were Masons also. Washington embraced the Masonic ideals of liberty and fraternity, and risked his property and his life for his principles. A more religious man than Hancock, Washington belonged to a church, but always left the service before the communion. It is said that his brand of religion was deism. He believed in one God, a God that created the universe. He avoided the dogma that had brought suffering and war to Europe for centuries. Washington's belief was one that was shared with several of the other founding fathers. To Masons, the creator God was the great architect. His powers were represented in the sciences, the most important of which was geometry. This is the basis for other sciences, significantly building. The surveyor's tools were symbolic of their belief and practical in Washington's earlier career. Franklin was a self-made millionaire. He recognized the value of Freemasonry as soon as he moved to Philadelphia. As a printer, Lodge Brothers referred business to other brothers. Having made his fortune by age 40, Franklin went on to establish fire companies, libraries, and the post office, of which he became postmaster. Being a postmaster at this point in time meant being a spy master, as this position controlled the movement of information. Franklin's European counterparts, many in sympathy with the American cause, freely shared information and spread disinformation when it served to further the cause. As a Mason and a man of science, Franklin could move freely within European society. In England, he was invited to stay at the Medmenham estate, where the Hellfire Club weekend long weekend long parties that would shake modern sensibilities. The central figure of the hedonistic group was Sir Francis Dashwood, who had been initiated into Masonry in Italy and whose personal proclivities leaned toward the occult. Dashwood may have had a quality that redeemed him to Franklin, in that Dashwood was England's postmaster. Together, Franklin and Dashwood were able to control and disseminate intelligence more effectively than the military. Dashwood's circle would unite many in England who were prominent royal subjects and yet actively promoted the cause of the colonists. One was John Wilkes, who called those who sorry, one was John Wilkes, who called those who challenged the English king the Sons of Liberty. Who called those who challenged? Okay, the Sons of. Okay, sorry, that didn't register. The title caught on, and soon resistance groups in several colonial cities were happy to operate as Sons of Liberty. England soon became too dangerous for Franklin, as many suggested he be arrested, so he moved to France. One very elite lodge, the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, was pleased to welcome Franklin as a brother. That lodge included many who would be active in the struggle for liberty. Some were prominent merchants whose importance in getting supplies and ammunition to the colonies was critical. Others were prominent thinkers who would influence public opinion. Franklin was present at Voltaire's initiation into Freemasonry, and one was England's top spy in France, Dr. Edward Bancroft. Franklin moved in circles where, it not for his participation in Freemasonry, he would have spent a lifetime earning a welcome. The importance of the role played behind the scenes by Franklin and a handful of other Americans has been marginalized by history. It was, however, at least as important as the military role. Not only were connections with the Freemasonry organization established in France, but even those at odds with Freemasonry were enlisted in the cause. The Knights of Malta, ardent Catholics loyal to the Pope, were not on friendly terms with Masonry. Catholics regarded Masonry as an institution that, by this time, was anti-church. From a practical point of view, however, both the Knights of Malta and the Masons considered England to be an enemy in need of comeuppance. 20 knights joined the war effort, and thousands of foot soldiers came along, including the original French Foreign Legion. The French Navy was under the command of Admiral de Grasse, a Knight of Malta, who delivered badly needed supplies to Yorktown. Looking at the war that became the American Revolution from a military stance, it is hard to accept that Washington's army was victorious. Defeated in all but a handful of battles, undermanned, poorly equipped, and unprepared, the Continental Army was chased from one state to another. Bordering on starvation, lacking uniforms and even shoes, the army managed to strike a blow every so often that wore down England's appetite for the lengthy conflict. Washington himself survived assassination plans by the English and the plot of a cabal of Americans that wanted to replace him as commander. At a time when commanding officers were sought after targets, Washington survived one battle after another, even though he rode into the field on a large white horse. Whereas the battles of Saratoga, Monmouth, and Yorktown are known to students of American history, the story of the Secret War has remained a mystery. Of all the plots that took place off the battlefield, perhaps the greatest is the story of Admiral George Rodney. Appointed to command the English Navy, Rodney had a serious problem. His gambling debts forced him to flee England for France. In France, he incurred even more debt and was unable to leave. Commanding a fleet in war was a lucrative opportunity. As a commander, was entitled to take a one-third share in the spoils of battle. Rodney saw a way out of debt, but not out of France. To his rescue came the Maréchal Duc de Biron, the military commander of France's French Guard. Although the two countries were days away from a formal declaration of war, the highest-ranking French officer lent a huge sum of money to the soon-to-be highest-ranking English naval officer. The circumstances beg two questions. Why would Biron lend this fortune to an enemy? The answer may lay in the fact that his nephew, the Duc de Lauzon, was leading the French Foreign Legion in battle. Biron felt the American revolutionary effort was, at best, a romantic adventure. The Americans, outmanned and outnumbered by the superior forces of the British, were surely headed for defeat, and he was afraid for his young nephew. The feeling was shared by the uncle of the Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette and his brother-in-law, the Viscount Noailles, I guess, Noailles, as well as the Count of Ségur, were barely out of their teens when Silas Deane, an American, recruited them to the cause. Lafayette's uncle laughed and called them the Three Musketeers, until to his horror he found they were serious. Not since the Crusades had young nobles so gladly rushed off to war. The second question is, what did the Duc de Biron expect in return from Rodney? The answer becomes evident. Rodney needed to supply the British forces under Cornwallis before de Grasse supplied the American and French forces in Virginia. The showdown was a certainty. The race was on between the two navies. Rodney understood the importance of beating de Grasse at sea or in the race to Virginia, and indicated this in letters to his commanders, and even to his wife. He then inexplicably failed to engage the French Navy 3 times, split his fleet, and sailed home to England complaining his prostate was acting up. The French Admiral de Grasse supplied fresh troops and ammunition to the siege at Yorktown, and the world was turned upside down. Cornwallis surrendered. The admirals commanders were astounded and complained to Lord Montague that Rodney was singularly responsible for the failure to supply the troops. The crafty admiral outmaneuvered them and returned to the Caribbean to defeat the French navy in the Battle of the Saints in 1782. He lost the war and only won the late battle, and despite criticism in the English newspapers, returned a hero. The defeat of Cornwallis was soon followed by the treaty that recognized America's freedom. Those who won the war would win the peace. The inauguration of Washington as the first American president was a Masonic celebration. The marshal of the day's events was Freemason and General Jacob Morton. The inauguration oath was administered by New York State's Grand Master Robert Livingston. Washington's escort was Freemason and General Morgan Lewis. The Bible used was the Bible of St. John's Lodge in New York. Another celebration followed shortly when the new capital, Washington, laid out by Mason Pierre Charles L'Enfant, was dedicated. This ceremony also was complete with baptism by corn, oil, and wine, more common to ancient mystery religions than to either Christianity or Americana. The new symbols of the country were the all seeing eye, truncated pyramids, and obelisks. While having no significance to most Americans, the significance was fully understood among Freemasons, as it still says on the $1 bill over and under the pyramid, Annuit coeptus and Novus Ordo Seclorum. The first phrase is a prayer to the god Jupiter. The second phrase means a new order of the ages. Washington may have understood that despite funding a nation based on fraternity and equality, there was a danger in allowing a secretive force, even Masonry, to become too powerful. The adage, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, seemed to indicate that the European concept of kings and inherited nobility was not to be trusted or allowed. After the Revolution, a society of officers that fought together was created. The Society of the Cincinnati consisted of American officers and nearly all of the French Knights of Malta. When Washington found that they planned to limit future membership to their descendants, he declared it elitism and threatened to quit the group. The order changed its policy. Washington was also offered a lifelong presidency of the order, which he refused. The American Revolution was followed by more than a century of revolutions in France, in the Italian states, in Latin America, and finally in Russia. Secret societies and conspiracies would topple entrenched ruling classes and governments that had existed for centuries. The French and Russian revolutions would turn into bloodbaths that saw opportunists and repressive dictators take the reins of power. Only in America was democracy forged, which is a lie. We're not a democracy. We never were. We never should be. We are a representative republic or a constitutional republic. Regardless, we're a republic. Before the new order of the ages would be 100 years old, secret societies would show a darker side. Within Masonry, a murder and cover up by Masons in New York saw the movement self destruct as public clamor halved membership and shuttered lodges. Nationally, power and self interest asserted the ability to corrupt the new democracy. Plots were made to return to England, to split the new country, and to assassinate Presidents Harrison, Taylor, and Lincoln. When victory could not be attained through Congress, darker means were employed. As the country enters its third century, secret and elite societies are alive and well and prospering. They have the ability to control the government, to topple it, to enrich themselves, or to safeguard the principles on which the nation was founded. The survival of ideals such as liberty and equality may rest in the balance between the mob and the elite, the powerful and the masses. It may depend on the vigilance of those with overriding principles or the intentions of Washington's great architect. And that is the end of that article. That leads us on to 21, which will be for next time. National Secrets. The Truth Might Be Stranger Than Any Fiction, by the same Stephen Sora, same author as the one we just read. And then Bacon, Shakespeare, and the Spear of Athena, Occult Origins of England's Role in the New World, again by Stephen Sora, whose writing I kind of enjoyed more than that Nisbet guy. But yeah, looks like we've got a few things on Francis Bacon there, whose book I have many of books by him and about him. Anyway, um, something I wanted to mention before I end is I actually have a book on all of the symbolism of the American currency. I think it's specifically just about the dollar bill, but it may be all of the currency. I haven't read it, but I have it, and if anybody is interested, I wouldn't mind putting that on the list of books to read in this stream fairly soon. In fact, if you would like, because it's not a big book. I don't see it right away. It's probably buried in the second layer of books on my shelf, but I definitely do have it. Anyway, um, yeah, we'll pick this up next time and for those next two articles. And I'm going to take a break and then come back and play some Oblivion. I'm still narrowing it down. I did a poll last night and I only got one vote, and it was for Star Wars Force Unleashed, the first one. So I'm actually going to put the poll up on Twitter and see if anybody wants to vote on a game. So far, I've narrowed it down to Mass Effect 3, Fallout 4, Force Unleashed, and one of the sniper games I have, probably Sniper Ghost Warrior 2 or um, one of those. Anyway, I will see you in a little bit. I'm going to try this shout out. I'll see if it works. Nope, it didn't work. Too many people do it that way.